So the share price went down today. It's a great opportunity to go out there and buy when everyone thinks it's a 400 gram deposit, because it's going to be higher than that for a number of years. Our balance sheet is now topped up. At the end of Q3 of 2022, we had $40 million US of cash. And then at the end of January, we issued another $40 million worth of shares. A financing that I think in some avenues or some parts of the investment community surprised the market. It's very difficult to telegraph these sort of things ahead. And everyone says, why didn't you tell us? Well, we can't by law. The portion of that $40 million, a portion of that $40 million was raised purely to ensure a precautionary amount of capital on the balance sheet. Right, we're going into startup, ramp up. It's a very risky time in the life of a mine. We don't have our hands on that. We're not the operator. I'm sure Fresnillo are doing a good job, and well, they are doing a good job, and I'm sure they will continue to. However, we were concerned that should we have some negative events in that startup, commissioning, and then ramping up, and we needed to provide additional capital, our balance sheet would get dangerously low. And I think everyone knows if you're going to raise money in this sector, you're better to go to the market when people don't think you need it than when you need it, because then you're taking it. So that's the situation for the money we raised for Juanicipio. We also raised about $15 million for Deer Trail, because what we wanted to do is, as we ramp up Juanicipio, get up to stable operations, we don't want to lose momentum on the geological success we're having at both Deer Trail and Larder. And so we raised common shares for the Deer Trail component, and we did flow through for the Larder component because it's based in Ontario. The monies we raised for both of those exploration projects, the intention is we have enough now to take us to the end of 2024, which means the cash flow that we're going to get coming out of Juanicipio should be unencumbered, except for management bonuses and things like that. So those who know us well probably haven't seen our three-way cable tie down the bottom there, but we thought it was pretty interesting to sort of portray our company like this now, because what we have here is a level of uniqueness around the assets that we have. Juanicipio, and Peter's going to talk about this a little more, sure, is located on the preeminent silver district in the world. Its location, 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 in a very de-risked situation with a company that spent 140 years mining silver there, running that asset for us. Deer Trail is on CRD Main Street, carbonate replacement deposits. If you're not a geologist, just think monster deposits. These have the potential to be very large, high grade, silver dominated, but also notable base metal credits. Sits on the Bingham Canyon Trend, one of two man-made structures you can see from the surface of the moon on Earth. Location, location, location. Larder sits on the Larder Cadillac Break. Again, one of the most significant gold-producing regions in North America. And we have a little stretch, 12 kilometres of strike length. What's that, 9? Did you shrink it? 9 kilometres of strike length on an area which Nathan's going to take you through this, where you'll see that there's remarkable geological opportunity here. I didn't actually introduce the speakers because when they come up, they can be introduced by the previous speaker. A number of you people in this room, we enjoy wonderful analyst coverage. A lot of people know the story well. been around for a while. In fact, the week after next, we hit our 20 years since our IPO in 2003. One gentleman in the room's been there since day -1, Peter McGaw, founder of the company. And I think it's a great mark for coming into our 20th year anniversary, we will have an operating plant. Wonderful list of shareholders, respected institutions, been with us for a long time and been very, very loyal shareholders to us. So as a summary on Juanicipio, before I hand over to Peter, we're now in the commissioning stage and probably moving through that a little into more of a ramp up. The power got connected just before Christmas. We started turning the mills in early January. And we've had a few mechanical, electrical failures or issues. Normal to what you'd see in a startup situation. And actually, I'm surprised at how few there are, given this plant sat there for a year, waiting for the power to be connected. These big things like to run. So we're now getting up into a very consistent run, 75 to 85% of nameplate. And so we made our first concentrate ready for commercial shipment yesterday. You can see it there. That black stuff, we call it the lead concentrate, runs 24 to 28,000 grams per tonne of silver. Very valuable lead concentrate. So this has been a great milestone for us this week. So the startup and commissioning is going well. Our guidance, together with Fresnillo, is nameplate capacity of 4,000 tonnes per day. By Q3, we're looking pretty good to achieve that. And whilst we're starting up the plant and starting to ramp the facility up, we're still putting some material through the 2 adjacent Fresnillo plants to sustain some cash flow for us through the ramp up stage. So I'll hand over to Peter now, who will come and take us through the Juanicipio exploration story. I don't need to introduce Peter. Peter McGaw.
Thank you, George, and thank everybody for being here. See a lot of familiar faces. Happy to see some faces that are becoming familiar, and some faces that we hope become familiar as we go forward. So, as George mentioned, we do focus on location, and we are in the Fresnillo silver trend right here. Of the roughly 60 billion ounces of silver mined in human history, about 10% of it has come from here. This belt is defined by 4 billion plus ounce silver mining districts. The Fresnillo district at 3.3 being the biggest of those, and actually it's the biggest single primary silver district anywhere on the planet. So this is a great place to be operating, and I'm absolutely delighted that only 27 years after first setting foot on the property, we now have a mill that's up and producing concentrates. And now that we have that distraction, hopefully moving out of the way, we can get down to what I care about in terms of the real business of this district, which is that here is the known part of the Fresnillo district, the historic Fresnillo mine, the Saucito mine, what we're building here at Juanicipio. And you can see this is one of the world's best vein fields. And when we zoom in on that corner of the property that we have, 16 by 8 kilometers, 5% of it has been explored. And there are very good geologic reasons, and this is a forward-looking statement in case you can't tell, that there are additional vein swarms within the joint venture ground that may be as good or maybe better than Juanicipio, than Valdecañas rather. So one of the things we've learned during our extensive exploration of the Valdecañas vein is that it sits right on top of an ore fluid upwelling zone. So there have been several of these identified historically in the district. So this is where the ore fluids come up from an intrusive center at depth. They come up along, in this case, along a structural intersection, and they spread out into what we now know as the Valdecañas vein. George talked about the grade profile, the bonanza zone. This is where the plus 500 gram material is, because we've just been mining the very top of this thing. As we go down, the silver grade will go down, but the volume will go up. And if you average this together, that's how you get that 400 gram number that you see. But for the next 6 or 7 years, we'll be mining this high-grade stuff at the top. But when we look in detail at this, we see there's a structural intersection. We see that there's a funnel-shaped skarn zone. Some of you are more familiar with skarn than others, but skarn is just high-temperature alteration. It's associated with boron and copper. We see that. All of these are key ingredients in the recognition of an upwelling zone. And when we back off and look at the surface, and the alteration styles that we see up here, we can recognize at least 3 other areas where we see the same alteration signature. Actually, 2 of them look very similar to Juanicipio. This one looks a little less similar to Juanicipio, but every reason to believe these are additional ore fluid upwelling points that potentially have major veins associated with them. We got a few holes into this one last year. Unfortunately, because of the permits we had to drill the vein from the backside, and it was dipping a little flatter than we'd hoped. And so the geometry was not good. We cut it way too high. We terminated that program until we have the permits so we can drill it from the west to the east rather than the east to the west and get down deep enough on it to get to the elevation that we need for the top out of the vein. In the meantime, permits are pending for these 2 areas down here. This one already has an operating mine nearby it, pointing towards it. We think actually this is where the fluids came up and they moved outward from there. That's based on comparison with other upwellings in the district. But the fundamental point is it's wonderful to have an operating mine. It's going to put out a lot of silver for at least 19 years based on what is now a 6-year-old PEA. Good chance that we'll be able to lather, rinse, repeat in 2 other parts of the property. And this is the kind of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. So the project takeaways: high grade, high margin, huge district scale upside. We're on track to ramp up to 4,000 tons a day according to our partners. And this ongoing mineral processing both in our mill and next door should give us operating cash flow, which will be ably managed by a gentleman who was not introduced. You're saving him for last? Oh, okay. So since we were here last year, Fausto Di Trapani has joined the company as our CFO, and it's in part his setting the bar very high on where he thinks the tank is starting to get empty. That's partially responsible for the financing that we did in January. But anyway, he's been a delight to work with, and I guess George is going to bring him up for a few words later, perhaps. So, district scale exploration remains good, both for the Valdecañas vein, or in the neighborhood of the Valdecañas vein, and then additional upwelling zones. So we can take some notes there if we want. As George mentioned, we have 2 other significant exploration projects: the Deer Trail Carbonate Replacement Deposit in Utah. This is a high-grade historic CRD deposit, which people didn't know about until an outfit called South 32 paid $1.5 billion for Arizona mining. I've been working in CRDs for 40 years. I used to get 1 call about every 6 months on CRDs. I get about 2 calls a day on them now. This fits all of our criteria in terms of size, grade, potential. It's probably related to a porphyry copper moly system. Until 2 months ago, no one cared about moly, or hadn't for a while. If you haven't noticed, moly has been going up. We picked up the property between 2016 and 2020. Mark Turcott doing the heavy lifting on getting that deal put together. We get to earn 100% on very reasonable terms. Jim and his team and Melanie started our sustainability program there in 2019. We've gone after it very carefully to work our way into a rural community where we want to be for a long time. If we're right, we expect to be there for generations. And we've been drilling since 2020, although at the moment we're not because the snow is about this deep. So it's been a remarkable year there. And with that, I want to bring up Lex Lambeck, who is, I should say Dr. Lex Lambeck, who is the project manager for Deer Trail and is going to give you the Deer Trail story. And then he's going to hand off the podium to Nate Tribble, who will tell you about what's going on at Larder. Lex, you want to come up? Yeah. Like that.
What's the pointer on it?
The pointer is the top, the one to the
Yeah,
right.
Manage that. Okay. Thanks for the introduction, Peter. I'm going to take you through now the Deer Trail project and again take you back to that central theme of location, location, location. So let's just step back and think, why are we here? Why are we after CRDs? And the primary reason is they're big. And we've got one up the street from us. The Kennecott Rio Tinto setup is one of the world's biggest copper mines. And we've got excellent grades on CRDs. And they're all fairly straightforward, mining costs and metallurgically simple. And the Deer Trail project ticks all of these boxes. So when we went through and looked at Deer Trail in 2018, before we made the final purchase in 2019, we very much went through our checklist and Deer Trail fitted pretty much all of these boxes straight away. We've subsequently ticked a few more, but the most important thing is it's part of that CRD Main Street, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. So that location, location, location theme, it's at the top of a carbonate section. We need carbonate rocks for CRD mineralisation, for carbonate replacement style mineralisation. And we're at the top of the section of carbonate rocks, so we've got room to move and room to grow. And we're also, as I'm going to show you, we've got the grade there. And some of these holes here, we're also picking up, while it's still narrow at this stage, but as a geologist, that rocks are really exciting. They're multi-stage, there's a lot of complexity in there, and that complexity suggests multiple pulses of mineralisation, which straight away is an analogy to size. Things are big. There's been a lot of pulsing of mineralisation over a long time period. So things like this are what get me up in the morning as well. So here we have the slide on location. You can see the Bingham Kennecott Rio Tinto mine up here, one of the world's biggest copper mines now. And it's on the same trend as the historic Tintic, and Park City comes off the side here. And here's Deer Trail. And it was long overlooked in the past because in the literature, the age dates just didn't fit this trend. They were much younger. But to us, when we went out there, it was like, that didn't make sense. So we redated rocks, 10 to 12 different samples there, and very quickly realised it is part of this trend. So that was very exciting. And that trend continues all the way down into Nevada at the historic Pioche deposit. So this is CRD Main Street coming down here on the tail of the Bingham Kennecott mine. And this is very much the generic CRD model, which fits the Deer Trail model very nicely. And Deer Trail is situated up here, historically in what we would say are poor, ratty limestone units within volcanics. The historic miners were there for 150 years before we were. And one day they would get rich, and then the next X years they would get poor again, because the mineralisation was non-laterally continuous, but it was high grade, and that's what brought us in there. And then in 2018, when I went out there and had a look at the property, it very quickly became apparent that that mineralisation up here that had been observed and people that had attempted to mine historically was actually coming up from something deeper. And we looked around at the geology and postulated that there's this red wall limestone that occurs all around the area regionally, but it wasn't occurring at Deer Trail because it was covered by younger volcanics. And we thought, well, if it occurs all the way around us regionally, it must be there, but it's just deeper. So some of our first holes drilled down and tested that theory and found that much more reactive limestone unit in the first hole. So that was an amazing success in its own right. And with that, we also found high-grade mineralisation in that area as well. So straight away, it started to give us a good proof of concept that we have the prospective red wall at depth, and we also have and see the plumbing system at depth. And the idea is, with more holes, as we understand this geometry, we can follow it down mantos, down these more subvertical chimneys, and head towards the porphyry style mineralisation as well. And what's really beautiful about Deer Trail and the property is not only do we own this ground and the ground out here, but we can control all this ground as well. And so we can attack this project from two ends. We can attack it from the manto end, this end, and what I'm going to show you is we've also got the option to attack the porphyry end from the mountain itself. And this is a generic model. In actual fact, is what I'm going to show you, this porphyry potential is actually much shallower and within easy drill range. And so this year we'll actually get to test that theory out. And so that's going to be very exciting. So just to highlight some of the initial results, we've got ample room of host rocks now to feed a large CRD skarn system. And we've now traced those feeder structures that are holding that high-grade mineralisation. You can see some of these numbers here. We've got some high-grade gold values. We've got gold up to, we've got a few spotty numbers up to 111 grams of gold occurring. We've got 2,300 ppm of silver occurring, and some good numbers for lead and zinc and copper. And there's still narrow intervals at this stage, but it's about understanding those and then focusing in more on the geometry. And I want to show you how we've done that in some of our subsequent drilling this year, or in this last year. So this is part of the Carissa news release that we put out in January this year. And I want to take you through some of the ideas and what led us to go out there. And this was something that it's a bit hard to see, but that's Lidar imagery. It measures the top topography of the Earth's surface to within a couple of centimetres. And very quickly, this highlighted green oblong here was noted that it looked like there was a big down drop block, like the Earth had dropped down a considerable amount there. And our first reaction was, what's caused that? And one of the many things that happen when you have mineralizing fluid is it actually reduces the rock volume by about 30%. And you get that reduction in rock volume, and it means a lot of rocks then from the top then drop down and cause this sort of situation. And you can start to get a down drop sort of environment that you see in that high level LIDAR geophysics that had never been done before in this area. So we thought, let's drill underneath it. And further to that, we also did soil samples across this area, and they also were anomalous in copper, which we thought was pretty interesting. So it was well worthy to put a hole out there, and that's what we did, and that's what's been released with the Carissa area discovery. And that's very much still early days, and we're still going to be planning on working that up with more holes this year. But what really was interesting is we got 274 metres of this sulfide lacing, and that's marble with sulfide laces through it that can run up to 100 ppm silver. Now, we're not calling that a discovery, but 274 metres of alteration is massive. I've drilled quite a number of these CRD deposits now in Mexico and in the southern US, and never seen one as thick as this for an alteration halo around something hopefully a lot bigger, and I want to take you through that. And not only this, but some close-ups. Again, we're seeing quite a lot of complexity in this core as well, suggesting multiple pulses of mineralising fluid. Those multiple pulses are more indicative of longer time periods and bigger deposit potential. So that's what 274 metres of alteration and mineralisation looks like. It's a lot of boxes of core. And you can see some of these darker pulses is where you've got some of the higher grades observed. And this basal one here is towards the end of the hole at 26 metres of what is a magnetite skarn. And the whole unit ran 0.2% copper. Now, we're not saying that's a discovery, but that's some pretty interesting alteration over that size of intersection. And this itself is running 0.6% copper and about 30 grams of silver. So it gets us a whole lot closer to something. So as a geologist, this is why we get up in the morning. It's exciting. So in map view, this is how we're looking. We had been drilling out in this area along the Deer Trail mine corridor, and this was this zone out here that we noticed was the down drop block, and we put a hole out there, and that's the 274 metres intercept that we got. Unfortunately, the hole, that was hole 9, hole 10 was coming in. It was coming in at a much steeper angle, and we were directional drilling off the main parent hole, and it was a very teary and emotional time for me because we lost the hole. We just ran into too many technical problems and couldn't continue. But we were still into quite good looking mineralisation at that point. So we had to abandon that hole, even though I cried a lot. And it really shows us there's this big alteration zone out here that previously hadn't been seen before, and it gets us a whole lot closer to underneath the mountain here, which is the Deer Trail suspected porphyry area. And that's an area I'm going to refer to as one of the hubs of this system. So let's just look at that last result in cross-section now. This is hole 9 here with the 274 metres of alteration, and then hole 10 came in much steeper. That's the one that we lost in mineralisation. And then what we're planning on doing this year, when the snow melts a little bit more, of course it's the bumper season for snow this year, which is excellent for water, but it makes it hard to get drill rigs up on the mountain. We're going to plan to put a hole further out towards the west, and again getting closer to this suspected porphyry underneath the Deer Trail mountain as well. So I want to show you some cross sections of that and the geophysics that we've also been working on. So let's just take a step back and introduce the idea of the hub and spoke model. This is very much using the Bingham Canyon Kennecott mine as an example. You've got this central hub, that's the porphyry copper that they're in at the moment, and that's what they've been mining. But for the first 100 years of the Bingham Canyon, not many people can remember that, but they were actually mining these lead, zinc, silver mantos that were all around it. And that's what eventually took them 100 years to move into that central hub area. What we're doing at Deer Trail is applying that same model using our knowledge now of the stratigraphy, the plumbing, the multi-stage systems, and that's basically guiding us in to the central hub as well. And so in this coming year and in the coming couple of years, we're going to be not only working on these spokes and defining them more, but we're going to come at it from the other end and being able to drill the hub. It's not going to take us 100 years. It will take us 1 to 2 years. And we'll be able to attack the project from both ends. So that's a really exciting style. And what we're also seeing on the property is we've actually got the potential for 2 hubs and more spokes. So we've got a lot of potential on the Deer Trail property. This is a result of some of the geophysics that we shot last year. And it's MT, magnetotellurics data. But what it shows up is, this is the top of the Deer Trail mountain here. There's this big red anomaly occurring right underneath the Deer Trail mountain of that suspected porphyry. And not only that, you go along 6 kilometres, and this is Mount Brigham, there's a couple more here as well. And that's all on patented ground, and we've got permits in place to drill this year. And these red dots here on the tops of the mountain, there's not a lot of vegetation because it's really high in arsenic. And that's always a good sign that there's something at depth there. So this is going to be a really exciting summer. We get to set up out this area and drill into this unit. And then if we start getting more success there, we can start looking at some of these other units as well.
Do you care what you find? Targeting a particular mineral? Just sort of when you go with it.
Well, from the manto side, it's a good question. It'll be silver, lead, zinc, and there'll always be some gold credits with it. But what we're seeing in some of the holes, we're also picking up quite a bit of copper now as well. And that copper, from a technical point of view, is secondary. It's come from somewhere else. So it's probably come from one of these hubs. And that's a good point. So down here, this is in the same section. It's a bit hard to see in this corner, but about 1.5, 1.6 kilometres away from this hub is the hole where we found that high-grade magnetite skarn down here. So that's copper. Potentially, it could be all part of that bigger system. Yeah, so you'll have the manto-style mineralisation, and we could actually find some porphyry-style mineralisation. Now, mag's not necessarily about drilling out porphyries. At that point, we bring in one of the big boys to help us. If drilling out porphyries is deep drilling, you need big budgets for that. But this CRD mineralisation and all the area around it, that's mag's skill set. That's their wheelhouse. What was that, sir? Not yet, but when they hear more about this, I'm sure they might ring us up, and I'm sure some of the other big boys might ring us up as well. So, yeah, South 32 is definitely interested, because no sooner did we put out our first news release than they just staked the ground around. So we'd already got what we wanted. So what I want to show you here is this is the property in map view, the outline of it here. That's about 10 kilometres by 10 kilometres. And this is the Deer Trail hub here, underneath that geophysical anomaly. This is the Bingham porphyry hub, or suspected porphyry hub here as well. And then all around it, if we go back and remember the CRD model that I showed, you have the alunite. And if you Google alunite, it comes up with the town of Alunite, which is just actually here because they're mining the alunite from this area here. Alunite, it was mined historically for aluminum, but it's also suggestive that there's porphyry potential underneath. Some of the biggest alunite deposits in the US occur right here. And the township of Alunite is out here. That's where they lived, and this is where they were mining it. So there's some really good historical indications that there's something big under there. And then you've also got a lot of polymetallic and silver mines, just historically small things, but no one's ever had it as a whole property for a long time. And so at DT, we've consolidated all of that, and now we control the whole property. Previously, for a long time, it was always broken up into little postage stamp operators, and it made it very difficult. So now we've got that holistic interpretation that we can apply. And so we have the hubs, and then we have the spokes radiating out from it. We've been looking just solely on the Deer Trail spoke out here. Now we found an additional spoke at the Carissa here. And so we've just got a couple of spokes that we're now just beginning to see. And we've got the two hubs, but we've got all this other part of the property as well to start exploring in the coming years. So I think we're up for a very exciting time over the next few years. And the permitting is basically all underway and well advanced. We've had some excellent permitting because we're on patented ground and on unpatented ground. US Forestry and the Division of Oil, Gas and Mining have been very supportive of us. And I should also just like to acknowledge Brian Summers over there in the corner, who's the president of the Utah Mining Association, and his support for DT on the ground in the state of Utah has also been instrumental, and will hopefully continue to be instrumental for our continued success on the project. So going forward for this year, what we're proposing is a drill program that is more regionally based, looking at those porphyry hubs that we've seen in the geophysics, and then also drilling out additional spokes from the Deer Trail hub, the Carissa hub, and potentially out here to the north, depending on how things go, and really start expanding out the project. So it's going to be a really exciting couple of years, just to say that again. So, yes? That's an excellent question, and it's something we're still figuring out. We've got to work it all in with Juanicipio. I'm still getting the nod from Fausto to how much we can spend, but we've got to work it all in. That's part of the monies we've raised, but it's probably upwards of 5 million. Well, yeah, that would be similar. I mean, that's coming through on the flow-through shares, so that will work its way up in time as well. Like all these things, we don't want to start out too fast, too hard. We've got to think it through with good scientific analysis before we start committing ourselves too hard. Sorry, what was that? Drilling costs are expensive, and we are drilling deep holes. So I think feels like US is some of the most expensive drilling. However, while we're drilling deep holes, you've always not got to get wigged out by that, so to speak, because we're coming in from the top of the mountain to understand the architecture. You've got to remember that DT Mining also owns the land on the side of the mountain, at the base of the mountain, so we can always come in from the side. So hopefully then mining costs are very much reduced when we come to mine it. And we don't have to continue, once we've figured out that architecture, we can drill from the sides of the mountain and reduce those costs even further. And as we understand drilling, we're also reducing costs. Any other questions before I hand off to Nate, who's going to take us through the Larder project and talk about location in Canada. So we'll be moving up the road. We had 2,500 kilometres there, and we've got now 3,500 up to another world-class trend. Thanks, mate.
Good morning. Thank you. Thanks for everyone showing up today. Excited. Oh, sorry. Not as tall as these guys. Well, thank you all for showing up, and I'd like to acknowledge the two First Nation communities here today. Thank you for showing up. We appreciate it, and we love working with you guys. And I'm looking forward to taking you guys through the Larder project. So you can see here, the Larder project is up in the on the border of Ontario and Quebec. So we're in the Abitibi. The Abitibi is one of the best places in the world to be exploring for gold. It has over 200 million ounces of gold production. And what's really unique about our property and location is that just down the highway, about 2 kilometers away, is about 5% of that. It's the Curratison mine. We're wedged in between the Curratison and the Upper Beaver mine, the Upper Canada mine, Kirkland Lake. So we're in an excellent spot to be doing our exploration. We have significant structural complexities on the property, and a lot of them have only been explored along the Cadillac-Larder Lake break. So there's a lot of upside on this project, and having our wings unclipped now, in a sense, we're able to go ahead and actually do the meaningful exploration that this project needs. It hasn't had it since, the inception of this project. It's been around since 1937, but it's never had that meaningful science background. All the past operators were really just looking to drill, but we're looking to, unravel this puzzle and really figure out what we're looking at here. So as you can see here, this is the Larder project in the yellow. Our neighbors to the east are Agnico. And what I'd really like to highlight right away, and I will be highlighting this throughout the presentation, is we have the first order structure, which is the Cadillac-Larder Lake break. We have a second order structure, which comes through here. It's on the contact of a trachyte and a sediment package. It's very unique, and that's where the Upper Canada deposit is hosted. And then we have the third order structure to the north, which is the Upper Beaver deposit. So on our property, we have 3 main structures, and only one of them has been explored for, which is the Cadillac-Larder Lake break. Historical operators have put a lot of time and money into exploring this area here. There is an old mine. It's called the Cheminis mine, and it sits right here, and it goes down to about 300 meters. So it hasn't even tapped into that really rich, below that 500 meter level. So these are types of exploration targets that we're really looking forward to kind of exploiting in the future. On the west side of the property, you have the Swansea zone, and it has only seen 19,000 meters of drilling along 4 kilometers, where if you come over here to the other side of the break, it's seen over 330,000 meters of drilling. So there's significant upside on the western portion of the property that we are actually drilling right now. It's looking very promising. It's very exciting. and I will nerd out a bit and show you guys a picture of some core later on.
Who owns the ground?
So it's a bunch of people, but to the east of us right away would be ore finders, and then as you move farther towards the Caradison, it's owned by a private company, and then you're into Quebec.
When was the last commercial output
In the district here, or
on the property you own?
1996. Shemina shut down in 1996. They only took 20,000 ounces out of the mine. So if I go to the next slide here, that little green shape I've made there, that's the only stope, that's the only ore they sent to the Caradison mill in the 90s. So the rest that in the yellow there that you see, that's all still in situ, still in the ground. So there's tons of upside, and not a lot of the gold was extracted. And there is underground development already. So there is upside for us to go down that hole one day if we need to. But this slide, it kind of is a good segue, good question, thank you, is what attracted MAG in the first place? Why was this such an appealing project? If you look here, we're looking at 220 kilometers from Kirkland Lake up to Val d'Or, and you can see significant size, grade, and district. It just blows up below that 500-meter line. We've only really tested the Bear deposit. It's our highest grade deposit. We have some really significant intervals, 24 grams over 10 meters in the core of it, and that sits at 600 vertical meters. So we're just starting to untap, below that 500-meter level. So for us, the upside is at depth on the project on the Cadillac break. There's two other structures I was talking about that we haven't even started to look at yet, and we're starting to get some really interesting geophysical surveys coming back for that too. So just the takeaway is this can get really interesting at depth here. And one thing to note before I move on is we drilled 9 holes last year after MAG took Bach Gatling. We did a little program testing some theories we had, and we actually intersected Cadillac Larder Lake break material, so ultramafics, komatiites, tholeiitic, iron-rich tholeiites, 1.7 kilometers down, so way down here. It's not faulted off, very, very unique rock, lots of assays outstanding, but it's very, very cool stuff that we're starting to see on the project. So this is the same slide that you've seen with the property boundary here in black. This is the Gatling project, the Larder project, sorry. And these are the order structures that come through our property. So historically, about 30% of exploration was done on the entire property and was only focused right here. So the Swansea zone hasn't seen anything. It's only seen 19,000 meters of drilling. It's very insignificant to me. And we're drilling that right now. It's very exciting. The rocks that you see here, that's the Cadillac break. On our property, the host of the corridor is an ultramafic host, like a talc chlorite schist. It's not gold bearing. But on either side of that, you have komatiites, which are just different flows, and then the iron-rich tholeiites. Those are the rocks that we're looking for. And the alterations that we need in order to get the juice is a lot of sodium alteration, potassium alteration, so sericite, albite. And when we get into these zones, they get really wide, and the gold is concentrated in these volcanic units. Now that's the first order structure. If we move up to the north, you can see Upper Canada sits on the contact of the gray sediments and the yellow trachyte. Historically on this property, there has been zero exploration since 1937 along that northern contact. We recently did a geophysical survey, a really big one right here, and there's a couple slides on it later, but we have identified some really interesting, meaningful targets that look similar to what we see over here at Upper Beaver's, or Upper Canada's mine. And then if you move farther north, you have a third order structure, and that sits on the Upper Beaver deposit. It runs down through our Curvit prospect, which is intrusion related, and we've had very good success in 2 drill campaigns in the past, upwards of 16 grams over a meter, and we also stumbled onto some conglomerate hosted mineralization. So in the last 3 years, we've been able to exploit the main break, generate some targets along the second order structures, and already have significant gold grades in drilling and on surface on our third order structure. So now our job is to go back, fill in all the gaps, and start generating more drill targets for the property. This is the same zoomed in version of our property, but what I wanted to highlight here is this: you're looking at a LiDAR survey, the same one that Lex was talking about. What it does is it highlights structures. So when we did the LiDAR survey, I contracted out a third party, and they were able to extract it down to about 20 centimeters. So you're looking at an extremely detailed structural map of our property. And then the color discoloration that you see there is the magnetic survey. So red to yellow is mag high, green's low. So what you're seeing is this large intrusion. We'll go back for a sec. This large intrusion here has been not looked at all in the past. It's very similar to what we're seeing at Upper Beaver and very similar to Curvet. It's a very interesting unit. That's why we elected to do a survey there. And what you can see here is there's just some very beautiful structural folds. We have cross-cutting faults. This is the recipe. That's what we're looking for. And so I just wanted to highlight that to you guys so you can see what it looks like when you strip off the geology and just look at structure. And I thought maybe it'd be a good time to tell you what these are since I'm talking about them all the time. So there's 3 structures. The first order fault is usually just the deep-rooted conduit for these fluids. The Cadillac Larder break is different. The fluids don't usually get stuck in the first order structures, but in our case they do, so it's excellent. And usually what happens is they come into the second order faults and the third order. So as these structures they're mostly splays and they come off at different oblique angles. And for us, we're seeing gold mineralization on all 3 structures on our property. And this is just a good visual to look at the first order structure. So the first is this really thick one here that you see. And as the sandbox was compressed and pulled and shifted, because you can see the movement on the fault here, you get the second order faults that are a little oblique, and then the third order that are almost perpendicular to the main. So this is the structure that we're looking for. It's kind of just an easy way to visualize what we're trying to achieve on the Larder project. So why Larder? What makes Larder so interesting? The value creation we can do at Larder is so significant because it's not just the Cadillac break. It's not just orogenic veins we're chasing, because that can get expensive and deep. We have already identified porphyry in intrusion-hosted gold. We've already seen Temiskaming conglomerates running gold on our property. And those are just isolated areas that we've explored, and we have over 20 kilometers of structure to still explore. So only 30% of the property has been drilled, been explored. We have plenty of blue sky on the property we still need to tackle. So we've gone ahead and we've aggressively permitted the entire property for line cutting, geophysics, drilling, and we're going to, over the next 2 years, we're going to be hitting the ground hard here. You can see down the bottom the pipeline for some of these surveys. The MT and the IP, we elected to do that earlier last year. It worked really well for us. It helped us identify the contacts between a couple different rock units, as well as some chargeability anomalies. So we're going to continue using that method moving forward. And the VLF and magnetic surveys, we're probably going to run a couple of those because they help with mapping different faults. So this is just a little flashback to last year where we did drill. I should update you guys on that. These are the 2 deep holes. Here's Fernland Zone, the Chemanis Mine, and the Bear Deposit. This is the Cadillac break. We do get thicknesses upwards of about 200 meters, so it's not necessarily narrow, and it's not necessarily one zone. There's multiple mineralized horizons within that Cadillac break on our property. This is the hole that drilled really deep, so the break is actually dipping down into the screen to the south, and we had some really interesting visual rocks. So we tested the deep theory at Chemanis, checkmark, went over to Bear, did the same thing, intersected Cadillac break material below it, so that was another checkmark, and we were able to extend our zone at the Bear East. It's a little bit of a challenging area with respect to our land boundary, but we were able to still drill some very meaningful targets. And while doing all this, we've also integrated a televiewer program, which is a downhole probe where it can measure some structures, as well as orienting our core. So we're capturing new structural data that the project has, there is none at all, and we're trying to learn and better understand these plunging lines, these ore chutes, because at the end of the day, we want to be able to drill meaningful holes, not just drill to drill to target, and actually hit the gold zones properly. So on the western side of the property, this is the Swansea zone. So this is an area of it's a high priority target for us, heavily underexplored. And it had a lot of boxes checked for us to go there and drill right away. So you can see the Cadillac break is modeled through here. Where the color of the background geomap, these are actually outcrops mapped. So you can see there's a significant, this is also a swamp, so it's really messy. There is no mapped outcrops here. So this is all inferred sediments. And it didn't seem right to us. It doesn't really make any sense, but the only way to find out is to drill it. So we had a magnetic survey. You can see here, there's some mag highs. This represents the ultramafic host, the Cadillac break. And these little white dashed lines here are IP lines. So they're supposed to represent resistivity and chargeability anomalies at depth. It's only 2D. It was done a long time ago, but we had enough boxes checked that we thought it was ready to be drilled. And we hit on our second hole 50 meters of green carb. This is extremely meaningful. On the property since 1937, there has been no recorded interval of altered komatiites, the green carb, which they mined at Caradison, over 25 meters. This is 50 meters, this is doubled. And throughout that, and this is what's got me up in the morning from my bed too, these albite zones. This is the juice. You want to see these albite zones. You don't want it to be just consistent green carb. It's good to see that. It's good to see the silica flooding, the alteration, but you need the sodic. You need the sericite. You need the potassium alteration. So this is green and brown carb. Very, very cool stuff. Pretty happy about it, to be honest. And this is underneath this area up here where there's no geology. So all this is going to be reinterpreted here. But very, very, very good start. Field season this year, we're going to be hitting it pretty hard. We want to advance these all these targets and these pipeline targets as fast as possible. So we're going to be hammering these 4 zones here. We call this one the plug because there's a little intrusions kind of plugged in the middle of the Temiskaming conglomerate. We had some really good, a lot of smoke from last year's program right around here. Number 2, we call this the long conglomerate, just because there's a big long conglomerate through it. And we did our geophysical survey right here. And what was really interesting that we saw was these little fold noses here. And that's actually where the geophysics picked up some of our anomalies. And then we'll wrap up Curvit. Curvit, we've been exploring it on, the strike length is probably around 800 meters. So we want to start to kind of go along strike a bit more, get some more alteration packages, find the right vector because there's a lot of smoke up there as well. And number 4 is our last little X marks the spot target. There's a bunch of intersecting structures there, so we think it's a very interesting opportunity. So when we did our 3D MT-IP survey last year, it had a bunch of reasons why we wanted to do it. First of all, we really liked the size of the intrusion, but we also wanted to see if it was a kind of a test trial, if it can map our rock contacts, because that's really important along the break. We do have trouble trying to find these, we call them knuckles, where if you get a little knuckle, it's a dilation point, and you try and chase that chute down. So it's really hard to find those. And when we did this survey, it was beautiful. The MT picked up the contact between the cyanide intrusion, the volcanics, the conglomerate, and the sediments. So it's worked really well. We're going to use it across the whole property, if they let me. And it's a brand new target we've identified right down here since 1937. I'll jump into that, and this is it here. So this is the section line, A to A prime. So you're looking east, and what it's been able to do, this is the chargeability. So anything pink usually indicates mineralization or potential mineralization. And the 3D MT is supposed to help map the contacts. And what we're able to see is the intrusion is very obvious. The volcanics kind of poke through in the middle right there. And right here we have this knuckle, is the trachyte sediment contact. That is what Upper Canada is for Agnico. This has never been looked at in the property before. This has moved right up to the top of our list of priorities to chase. So it's very exciting, and we will be drilling this at some point in time. So the planned geophysics moving forward, since our thesis on the first one worked really well, is we're going to do a ginormous one over here on the break. We're going to try and map out those structures, try and get a better reading on the komatiites and the volcanics and how they act together. It's going to be a 3 kilometer by 2 kilometer survey. It's going to be very large. And we're going to do the same thing on the Swansea side because we're seeing visual success already. We want to kind of tie that together with our current drilling. And then I think this might be another candidate. So we're going to permit it anyways because the permits in Ontario are good for 2 years. And if we can do it, we'll do it. So what's planned for this year? We're going to be drilling. We're going to be drilling at Bear, Chemnitz, and Fernland. We're going to be chasing. Once that survey is done, we'll have a better idea of where these ore shoots are, where these knuckles are. The Swansea is going to merit a follow-up program, and hopefully we can drill out those 2 targets that I was talking about that represent something of Upper Canada nature. Our structural program is very detailed right now. It's oriented core. We're getting excellent readings on what these plunge lines look like. The televiewer data is not ideal all the time because it's quite expensive, but it's the only way to go back down old holes and capture old historical structural data. There's no other way to do it, so we're doing that as well. The geophysics, I've explained myself, so we're doing MT, IP, potential VLF, and update and tighten our magnetic survey. And the field programs are geared towards tackling the 2nd and 3rd order structures because we already know there's lots on the break. It's not a problem there. And we've also elected to go back to all the pulps that are on site because this head frame's been there for 50 years. There's a bunch of old pulps back here that we've got into the database now. We have pulps from Gatling's 2019 to 2021 programs that are sitting around, and we're going to do a 4-acid digestion method. Gives us a little bit more of a clarity on a lot of different elements. So it works really well for this project. And we'll integrate that into the database and reinterpret that. And we'll keep moving forward. And George.
Thanks, Nathan.
Nathan and his wife have a newborn as well, so I'm pretty sure that gets him up in the morning as well, other than geological excitement. So just wrapping up, only be a minute here now. Focus, of course, this year is the ramp up at the plant to nameplate at Juanicipio, generating cash for our future strategy moving forward. I hope we showed you today the technical expertise we have with the people managing our projects. We have Nathan's the leader of Larder geologically, but he's got Danielle up there, and there's a really good group of technical people there, which is another thing that attracted us to that opportunity. It wasn't just geological potential, it was the people that were running it. This guy speaks for himself, his history. He's got Joe down there, he's got a whole group of dedicated, technically competent people working deer trail. And that leaves myself, Fausto, Peter has oversight over all the exploration, but we really focus fully on Juanicipio, and we don't get distracted with the other excitement and geological potential we have. So our focus is get the plant running, start to make cash flow. You asked about the spend, right? In a normal year, year on year, it's $10 million a year at both of those projects. We just raised a bunch of money for exploration. We're very respectful of capital in MAG. And we're not drilling with any of that new money yet. We've got a lot of drilling conducted. There's a lot of data. We're going through a lot of analysis now. And we are a technically driven company, prudent managers of capital. And we're going to take a couple of months to work out where do we go next to give ourselves the best chance of success. So watch for drilling results coming out from Larder soonish from the program that we've got. Deer Trail will continue to update you on the drilling we do there once we get back on it. And always when permits come for Juanicipio, we're going to love to get to drill that. I wanted to mention Fausto. Fausto is our CFO, been with us for almost a year, and has really brought a level of operational knowledge and production experience into the team. And he's far more than a CFO. He's someone who holds Fresnel accountable for providing good reporting and telling us what's going on. He keeps the people at the operations tight on their budgets, and he's a welcome addition to the team. So Fausto, I just wanted to acknowledge you here at the end. And then everyone knows we've got a PEA out there, and it's 2007, and we've been drilling a lot, and I can't tell you other than say have a look at the Fresnel updates on the Juanicipio resource and reserves, and it's a much bigger number now than what it was in 2017. But we've elected not to spend the money to update technical reports when we know the answer's the same. But we need to refresh the market and advise on the current status of the project. So once the plant's operating and we've got a good handle on steady state, what the costs are, future sustaining capital requirements, we will update our resource and probably generate reserves. So that's MAG. Our business model is really simple. Take this high-grade deposit in Mexico, to bring the cash back to Vancouver. We've already tested that in December, by the way, and it's pretty straightforward getting money out of Mexico. That will fund, that cash funds the exploration program at our two properties and leaves excess cash to return to shareholders. And we've now financed a bridge to steady state operations and our ability to do that way into the future. That's the end